My name is Kenaz, and I am the principal product manager responsible for Project Nebula. I know that there's a lot of really good talks, including two by really brilliant engineers that are going on at the same time. So thanks for coming to the product manager talk. You might be questioning that decision right now, but hopefully I'll make it worth your while. It's not my job actually every day to keep highly available applications up and running. But it is my job to talk to a whole lot of people who do this for a living every single day. And in this talk, we're going to go through and actually find out what some of those people have been going through as they are trying to adopt cloud-native technologies, how we've approached some of those problems in Project Nebula, and then a little bit about what's coming next. So the question that we've started with in trying to understand how people are adopting cloud-native technologies is how can Puppet help you deliver faster in a cloud-native world? And when we've, over the past 7 or 8 months or so, as we've had over 100 different customer conversations with different types of customers, some of them being really large and really advanced and really sophisticated in their use of cloud-native technologies. Other ones are really large and really early stage, just getting started and getting their toes wet in trying to figure out how to make use of some of these technologies. We've talked to small shops that have been born in the cloud, started their first deployment using containers and Kubernetes and some of these things. And we've talked to a lot of folks that are just real early days in trying to understand how all these pieces fit together. But when we ask them, what does sort of faster mean to you? We get a lot of different answers depending on where they're talking from. From an individual perspective, an individual system administrator who's trying to set up these tools for the first time, or a developer who's trying to get their code commits, that it might be a faster turnaround cycle for a single change that they make and enabling that change to get to production faster. For a team, it might be things like enabling that team to ship autonomously without having to wait on a central release management team to approve that change. It might be enabling that team to quickly build out development environments of their application so they are able to test their changes really quickly. For an organization, it looks different still. It might be onboarding multiple teams quickly so that even and when I say multiple teams, I don't just mean the teams who are super early adopters, the people who go to the grocery store and write their shopping list in YAML. These are the people who are still trying to figure out this stuff for the first time. How do you get those teams to also be able to adopt the same standards and practices that have been proven successful in other places in their organization? Across the board, what we found is that the goal was to deploy changes more frequently. And really, we asked, what's sort of the key to that? From especially these more sophisticated customers, what is the key to being able to rapidly make changes? And unsurprisingly, it's making it a habit. Doing these things every day, frequently, and understanding the pain and going through the process of deploying is the only way to actually get better at it, not surprisingly. But if you are surfing for the first time and this is you really hope that that's not the first time that you've been on a surfboard. What you really want is to make sure that it looks more like this. You are taking it easy, one step at a time, and you are reducing the risk of any incremental deployment so that you can deploy faster, so you can deploy more frequently. When we talk about what does risk reduction really mean and what are the key practices that can enable you to reduce that risk, what kind of converges or emerges is a couple of key things. One is reproducible environments. And what that means is any single change that you make to your environment, can you replicate everything from the infrastructure to the application change with a new code commit that goes out and recreates that entire environment? Can you create a development environment that accurately models and represents the changes that you've made and be able to do that over and over again? Independent services. architecting your applications so that different teams can deploy independently, so that they're not tied together and they don't have to share a common release management team or release management process, and instead they all can deploy by just talking to each other over services. The last thing is deployment strategies, and what I mean here is using the right appropriate deployment strategy that enables you to model the risk of your application change. And if it's a highly risky type of change, then making sure that you've put in the right deployment strategy that enables you to validate it over time. For instance, a Canary deployment that might deploy only 1% of your traffic to production to that new instance, and then incrementally changing it over time, 10%, 25%, 75%, so that you are gaining confidence at every step of the way that the change is not going to blow something up. So when we ask, what does that mean for then your delivery automation? How does that change? We get a lot of different answers, and some of those are real blank stares, because in reality, it's a spectrum. And there is a maturity model or a curve here associated with some of these practices. And what we found is a lot of folks are still in sort of either ad hoc deployments, release management, or even up to the point of what we call continuous delivery, which are things like having CI implemented, having some teams broken out into microservices. But overall, where they start to struggle is when adopting what we call continuous deployment. Things like decentralized governance, like being able to adopt fully container orchestration platforms like Kubernetes, ECS, or Pivotal Cloud Foundry, as well as implementing some of those deployment strategies that we talked about. So what we find is whenever a team is starting to look and say, how do I get over to that continuous deployment side? Once you get to a continuous delivery model, there seems to be a cliff there, and a lot of people fall. So what are those problems that we find associated with moving from a continuous delivery to a continuous deployment model? That is what we've been having discussions and conversations about over the past several months. So what's the problem? Problem number one is that there's just a whole lot to learn. And even for people here in this room, and I know for myself, how does talking about cloud native really make you feel? So if you were walking around KubeCon and all you heard were people's talks, you might think that literally everyone around you is crushing it, and you are the only one who had to Google how to change namespaces in Kubernetes, because I still have to do that every single time. And the reality is, everyone is trying to learn these tools, and these tools are rapidly growing. As we see from the landscape, which I just pulled yesterday, they even pointed out that they know people are overwhelmed. It's part of the marketing. We know that this is a fast-moving space, that for every single tool that you try to adopt, it is a new learning curve. And when you try to learn that tool, you have high expectations for yourself as a technical person who understands how to put these tools together. And you have a certain set of expectations about what is going to happen. But in reality, it looks a little bit different. When you're trying to run Terraform for the first time and you have to configure your backend, you have to modify the state file, you have to work with existing infrastructure, you use Kubernetes, and you have a whole set of new command lines that you have to learn. There are a lot of pieces in play, a lot of context switching. So this is actually a article that was written by O'Reilly as they did a real survey of, what are some of the real problems with adopting these technologies today? And the biggest challenge across the board that we find is a lack of skills. And this is really interesting when coupled with the next point, which is who manages your organization's cloud-native infrastructure? It's a DevOps team. So what I think the point here is there's an opportunity here to be able to level up your skills, to be able to use tools like that Puppet can help you provide, and partner with us to adopt and become those people who understand how to leverage these technologies. In the same way that when you learned Puppet the first time, it didn't enable you to just forget about everything that was happening on that server. In reality, you still needed to understand every one of those server configurations, but what Puppet helped you to do is have the tools that brought it together into a single workflow and experience. Whoops. So here's an actual collection of some of the customers that we have talked to who we classified as early stage. And the one I want to bring to your attention is this large automotive company that we've been working with for the past couple months, who has a separate DevOps team that's been chartered with enabling their entire organization to adopt cloud-native technologies. And their biggest pain point is creating a set of standards or a standard toolbox to be able to enable all of their different teams, 600 different projects in their organization, to adopt these technologies. And even for these early companies, we see the emergence of these separate DevOps teams, or as Yvonne mentioned this morning, infrastructure developer teams, who are able to understand the nuances of how to put these things together and start creating the best practices for their organization. The second problem, which is maybe a little controversial as whether it's actually a problem, is that teams like to pick their own tools. And so if I asked you, with this list, how many tools do you use today to get a particular container image from your local developer machine all the way to production? You might say, well, I use Terraform to provision some infrastructure. I use kubectl to go and deploy that Kubernetes object, and then I notify in Slack. But if you ask 3 different teams, you might get 3 different answers. Because if you talk to any of these really large companies, they all have one of everything. And even sophisticated shops have one of everything. Because different teams have different needs. And in order to enable those teams to move quickly, they need the ability to choose. And so you need, as an organization, the ability to support different teams. Picking their own tools can be very powerful, can enable those organizations to move very quickly. But as one of our teams told us, even if you have 50 different ways to get a container image to production, at the end of the day, there's only one company who is accountable if there is a security incident, if there's a data breach, if there's something bad that happens, that there's still only one company accountable. So at some point in time, you have to make a choice between balancing the choice that you give to your developers and the teams, as well as enabling governance so that all of those teams are using approved tools or approved workflows that ensures best practices are being followed. And so when we talk to some later stage customers, here's what we find is that they do have a plethora of different ways of getting these applications to production. But at the same time, one of the pain points that emerges is governance, because they need different ways of making sure that all these different teams are running unit tests, are doing security image scans, are performing integration tests, and validating that their changes are going to production in a safe and secure way. The third problem that we frequently run into, and this is mostly the case for when organizations have already tried to build this themselves, which is there's a lot of stuff that is needed for even a basic delivery platform. And this is just a sampling of what we've Googled on Reddit, and I promised my team that these are not my own usernames that I generated and created, seeded the space. But these are real people who are asking how to do these things, because there is a whole lot of different things to build, whether it's pipelines, a way to trigger those pipelines, a way to implement secrets management, a way to implement notification systems and secret auditing, manual approvals, automatic rollback. These are all different types of features that are needed for any organization of a certain size that is enabling different teams to adopt different tools. So in summary, building for multiple teams is really hard. Adopting cloud native requires you to change a whole bunch of different things. And at the end of the day, we find that these 3 problems endure: lack of skills and experience in a cloud native world, and understanding going through the pain of actually learning and putting these tools together, balancing freedom of choice with the governance and implementing best practices, and then having a high cost of ownership of actually building and maintaining a fully featured product. So these are some of the problems that we are looking to solve with Project Nebula. And our goal is to dramatically simplify cloud-native deployments. And what that means for us is not that, again, that you are able to abstract away all of the underlying tools that are being used in this space, but rather that you are able to harness each one of them within a deployment workflow that enables you to easily use them to ship your applications. So the way we describe it, our solution, I need a way to continuously deploy applications and infrastructure that use simple deployment workflows that are targeting different deployment targets, whether that is Kubernetes, whether that's ECS. We want to be able to ship your image to a whole bunch of different targets that leverages the things and tools that you already use today. So in this case, if you use Azure Resource Manager to provision or to describe your infrastructure and deploy that, you should be able to use that within our framework. If you deploy to Kubernetes, obviously you should have many tools that enable you to do that. And if you are deploying, if you already have Jenkins implemented for your CI system, you should be able to plug into that. We shouldn't try to force you to use our tooling, but rather enable it to come alongside your existing solution and plug it in a way that makes sense. Here's an example of what that might look like, and this is actually taken from one of our customers, where they already have Bamboo as their solution for CI, and they want to then kick off a deployment pipeline to go take that container image that gets created by their CI job and push to production. And so that amounts to creating a dev Kubernetes cluster where they can push the change to, run a set of integration tests, and validate that that change is correct. And then using a deployment strategy, in this case, Canary deployment, to go and open that throttle to production so they can incrementally validate that the change is still good. And then if that is successful, then automatically finish the deployment. Otherwise, if there's an issue, initiate a rollback sequence. So at this point, I'm going to show a demo of Project Nebula and how it actually works. In this demo, it's going to be very, very basic, deploying an app to Kubernetes from scratch. And so everything from provisioning the cluster to deploying the application to that particular cluster, and then notifying my team with Slack. And so I'm going to really hope that the Wi-Fi is not going to fail on me. This is a totally live demo, so you know how it goes. So this is the product. This is Project Nebula. And this is one of the workflows that I am using to deploy this application. I'm going to run this workflow, and I'm going to notify my team. And what should we say is not going to fail. And point to my project. We model our deployment as code, as Melissa called out in the keynote earlier, and it also visualizes that deployment. And so we can see in this case that there's 4 different steps associated with this workflow. The first thing is bootstrapping Terraform, because as I mentioned, you can't just run Terraform. You actually have to provision a, for example, GCS bucket that keeps the state file as a remote backend, and then it goes and actually runs Terraform to go and create the GKE cluster, as you see in this example. We then go and deploy a very simple Gatsby application to the cluster, and then we I forgot to do something. Hold on. Okay, you guys are gonna watch me fail in real time. So at the last moment, our engineer put in a really awesome feature that I'm like super excited about. It's called confetti. And this wasn't in the earlier demo because we couldn't get it in time, but I'm now going to demo it for the first time. Now I'm going to rerun this thing. Run. Try it again. Nebula workflows. Take 2. And now really hope that the Wi-Fi didn't just work on me. Bum, bum, bum. I knew that was like the exact wrong thing that I should do at this time. I did. I tried to dynamically change this on the fly and, okay, well, this is the previous one that's running. Oh, come on. Okay, I'm gonna try this again, because this is like one of my favorite features. Take 3. Okay, all right. Now it's gonna kick off. Well, while we wait for this to go, today we support 2 integrations. We support GitHub and Bitbucket as the place where you can store your workflow file. And so the idea here is that you have your deployment workflows that you put into your repo alongside your application code, or in a separate place that you do deployment workflows. And you can hook it up to our tool, and we'll dynamically go and reach out and grab it. And every time you make a commit, like I just did, it will now update the tool. The other thing that I'm pretty excited about is we have in-app documentation. And so for Puppet, this is actually a new thing where we're trying to make it really easy for you to actually be able to understand what's happening or what's happening in the project, and as these features get updated, to be able to see the documentation quickly. And the other thing that, as we talked about earlier, the ability for different team members who have different levels of skills or maybe adjacent skill sets to have the right level of access to the product, we have already built in from day one RBAC. And so this today is pretty simple. It enables you to do assign an administrator, operator, or viewer role. But whenever I do that, it enables me to just have a view of the deployment that's running. And so in this case, this is totally off script. But I'm going to go back to my Nebula demo, sign in with a viewer permission, and see if I can see that deployment workflow run. And so in this case, now you can see that there's no ability for me to change the workflow. There's no ability for me to actually re-kick off a workflow because I'm just in viewer mode. I can't see the secrets. I can only see that, hey, this workflow is in process. And so if you have a team member that is looking to understand what's going on with the deployment, you can send them a link to this without actually having to give them the whole keys to the kingdom and have bad things happen. We also support a centralized secret configuration store. And so the idea is that there's secrets that you don't want put out in your logs. We have a centralized place to put those secrets. Yes. It worked. Okay, sweet. I wasn't sure about this, but yeah, I'm glad that this actually happened. Yeah. All right, so yes. You guys have no idea how long I've waited for this feature. And so what we've seen is that you can deploy this application to production and then notify the team. I'll show you that we actually did notify the team. Take 3. Awesome. James, can you thumbs up that? Okay. There we go. Sweet. Okay, so then the last thing that I want to show is the fact that for each one of these steps, we do output the logs associated with each one. That way, you can see exactly what happened. In this case, provisioning a Terraform cluster, deploying the application to Kubernetes, and then notifying that everything went well. I'm going to make sure you know that this is not a fake demo. Actually grab my service here. This is the wrong cluster, so that I can grab this endpoint. And see that, hey, there's an actual real application here. Sweet. OK. So sorry for that detour. That went a little bit off script. One thing, as Melissa called out earlier in the keynote, is that we are using a different open source model here, where we're leveraging an upstream project in the Kubernetes community called Tekton, which is a first for us. We are trying to expand our definition of what open source means, which means not just working on projects that we start, but actually contributing to and starting to contribute to projects that are core to our product, but are in a community project that anyone can get access to. We have, as Melissa mentioned, our public beta open today, and so please sign up for it. If nothing else, than to shoot confetti out of your deployment steps. And we're really excited to get your feedback. We're really early stage in terms of understanding what is most valuable, and so we need your feedback to ensure that we are building for real people. Some things that we feel a lot more confident about: deployment strategies, as we talked about, having out-of-the-box content that you can use to do a blue-green deployment or a Canary deployment. That seems like table stakes for us. So that will definitely be in the product. Things like a workflow catalog that you can use to develop these workflows and then give other people access to just being able to run them or being able to use them in their own workflows. We think that sort of a workflow catalog kind of concept might be interesting. Another one is actually having more awareness about what's actually running within the environment. So for instance, if you are doing a Kubernetes deployment using Helm, rather than it just saying, Helm image updated, and you're like, I think that went OK, that instead now you can see exactly what are the resources that are being created on the cluster. So that is the end of the prepared session. I'm open for any questions here. I know we're running a little bit low on time, but any questions?
You mentioned that you store passwords. What is those passwords?
Yeah, so we have a vault service that we're hosting, and that's built into the product. We've built it in a way that we expect to integrate with other third-party backends. And so the next ones on that list being AWS Secrets Manager and Azure Key Vault. If there are other ones that we need to support, we're happy to take that feedback.
We've got a mic here for questions just to make sure we capture it.
Does Nebula support GitHub Enterprise?
So not today. Right now it's just GitHub, but that's a good request. Let's make a note of that. Yeah, thank you.
Any support for ECS or Fargate in the future?
Yeah, so we actually do support ECS already in terms of being able to provision a cluster and deploying to it. And so we are going to expand that over time as well, but we have some preliminary support.
Thank you.
Hey, what was your thinking behind using Kubernetes for a Gatsby website?
I'm not going to answer that. Yeah.
How about just regular a Git server, a local Git server for?
Yeah. So right now, that's a great point to touch on. Is that in order for us to get feedback quickly and also to enable a bunch of people to try it out faster, we started as a SaaS service. And so in order for us to implement on-prem connectivity, it would amount to us implementing something, maybe an agent or something else that enables us to talk to a local Git server. That's still in the works. But so today, the short answer is not supported. But we would love to take that feedback and potentially implement it. So,
You said that you had a Vault instance built in for storing secrets. If you have a customer that's got an existing Vault installation, is it possible to integrate with the existing stuff?
So yeah, same point, not today, but that is another one that is on that list with those other secrets managers. Yeah, thank you.
15 minutes left. Last opportunity to ask questions.
Hi. So last year we invested heavily in Bolt as well, and some very advanced Bolt plans where we combine Terraform and in essence do the exact same thing as you do with Nebula. Where would you draw the line? Like this is where Bolt stops and this is where Nebula starts?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we see ourselves as being an orchestrator of things like Bolt plans. So you would be able to bring your Bolt plan and package it alongside all these other pieces. You could obviously accomplish the same thing within a single Bolt plan itself. What you don't get is running it as a service, some of the RBAC capabilities, all of the other sort of service-based things that we can provide. But yeah, so that's the way that we kind of see that integration today. If you have other ideas or you're interested in other ways that might integrate, happy to talk about them.